Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our latest webinar. Today, the topic of which is how to realize the DevOps dream in ServiceNow. And my name is Paul Chorley. I'm the co-founder and managing director of autotestpro Limited. We provide a DevOps and automated testing solution for ServiceNow. So most DevOps presentations start with this question: what is DevOps? Well, we're not going to start with that question. When I was doing the research for this webinar, I found there were hundreds of webinars and YouTube videos explaining exactly what DevOps is. And we're not going to add to those today. I'm going to assume that you know what DevOps is and move quickly on to what we think we should actually spend time on, which is the why for DevOps, and more importantly, and the focus of this webinar, is how to do DevOps, especially in ServiceNow. In my view, I don't think that knowing that DevOps is a big cultural change, or that knowing what the difference between continuous delivery and continuous deployment is, moves you actually any closer to making DevOps a reality for you in your organization with ServiceNow. This webinar is more about the harsh practicalities of ServiceNow software delivery and the realities and difficulties of making releases in complex organizations, especially when constrained by things like monthly cabs, maintenance windows, ISO audits, and so on. And we're going to show how DevOps can overcome these challenges. So the first step in realizing the DevOps dream in ServiceNow is facing up to the practical realities of delivering ServiceNow releases in complex organizations. And we'll show how you overcome these. This webinar is about putting DevOps into practice, not restating some DevOps theory. So assuming you know what DevOps is, a much better question is why DevOps? What's in it for me, my customers, my users, my stakeholders? Well, let's take a step back a second and think about why you chose ServiceNow. You obviously chose it because you wanted to provide a great service to your customers, whether those be internal or external. But the reason you chose ServiceNow over any other platform was because you felt it was deemed to provide the greatest quality in terms of user interface, platform robustness, etc. The speed at which you could provide new features and enhancements through its excellent configurations and customizations. The efficiency at which you could do this, i.e. the low cost to maintain and enhance, etc. And given these, the operational cost for providing the service would be as low as possible. And of course, if you reduce your costs, you increase your organization's profit, and you delight your customers with an excellent service, which in turn can lead to greater profit. So how does DevOps affect this? Well, it firstly enables better quality through better test coverage, fewer errors and mistakes, and so on. It enables greater speed or velocity of delivery, so you can get new features to your user base more quickly and more efficiently. And you do that with less resources. And therefore, you're reducing your costs still further. And this in turn, of course, leads to greater profit and even better customer satisfaction. So now on to the really important part. How does DevOps do this in ServiceNow? So in order to answer this, I'm going to do a walkthrough of a pretty typical ServiceNow release cycle you would find in a large organization. And this scenario is drawn from very real-life experiences over the last 20 or so years, having been involved with many large delivery and complex projects. And this is based on reality of what actually happens, not, again, not theory. So we've got a backlog of change requests here shown on the left-hand side. They may be from users or from the IT team, or they might be bugs. And we want to prioritize those to be put into a release. So we pick a few of them that we need to or want to release. Now, next, we normally have to set a release date. And generally speaking, this is quite arbitrarily picked based on pressure from stakeholders perhaps the business, from external customers maybe even. And it's normally fixed around a pre-stated and set maintenance window provided by the operations team. These are often monthly and not negotiable, so you can't drop changes in at any time during the month. And normally if you miss that maintenance window, you have to wait till the next month to do your release. It's not an option to slip it by a couple of days. And of course, in many organizations, in order to get anything into production, you need to go through a change approval board. Again, these have preset dates. Sometimes they're weekly, sometimes monthly. And if you miss one of those, again, similar to the maintenance window, you have to wait for the next one. I'm sure this is a familiar scenario to most of you. For the purposes of this scenario, we're going to assume we have to go through the one cab before the maintenance window to gain approval. So because we've now got a cab date, we can start to put in some key milestones onto our plan for the release. So we've got a testing phase there and a user acceptance phase before the cab approval. So requirements and development work starts on each of the change requests that we want to include in the release. And it's always quite curious to me how the most complex change gets started after the easy ones, but that tends to be the way. And inevitably, the most complex change normally runs over the milestone that was set for moving into testing without the development having been finished. Quite often developers, a favourite saying is, it's almost there. The decision is made anyway to move into the test phase and continue the development work. The PM is under pressure to hit the deadline for the release, so wants to push on with the testing. So testing of the changes occurs during the test phase, and bugs are fixed and tested as they're found. And due to time constraints, the system is not always fully regression tested for each fix. So especially this last one that we've just found, we've found it fairly late on in the test phase, so it's likely that only that particular fix would be retested rather than the whole of the system. And of course we'll feel the pain of that later on when the system's gone live, but we don't know it at this point. So testing is coming to an end, and it looks like the project is going to meet its milestone for the next stage, which is to move into UAT. But at the last moment, a major defect is found with the most complex change. So what happens in this situation? Of course, what should happen is that the release gets replanned for the next maintenance window. But what actually happens in reality is everything gets condensed down. The PM is under so much pressure to get these changes in that the UAT phase is significantly condensed. So how is that done normally? Well, it's normally done by reducing the scope of the user acceptance testing. So a subset of tests are run. Tests are copied and pasted, perhaps, from the previous test run to save time. Surely that wouldn't happen. Shortcuts are taken, tests are skipped, things are not fully tested, and so on. And all of this adds up to increased risk, of course. The cab date arrives, and in order to hold to the go live date, the change is submitted to the cab. And the cab board, it's normally said that sufficient testing has been done and everything seems to be okay. In reality, most likely, user acceptance testing is probably still continuing even as the cab is taking place. And even after the cab board has been held, there's probably further fixing and testing going on as we move towards the migration into production. Of course, the testing that's being done here is normally very specific. There's no time for regression testing as everyone's in a bit of a panic to get the release into production, and this is the reality of what really happens. So finally, the release is put into production, and the project team sigh a big relief and go home for the weekend. And Monday morning arrives, and the users start to use the system. And of course, because of the shortcuts taken in testing, the inevitable starts to happen and things don't work. So defects start to get raised and stakeholders start to get unhappy. Typical kind of refrain you get from stakeholders is, you said it had been tested, I want to see the test results now. And of course the users are unhappy too, because they don't know how to use the new features because they weren't given any documentation because of the reduced timescales toward the end of the release. No user documentation was produced. This was seen as a nice to have. So this is the kind of reality that organizations face on a monthly basis with a monthly release cycle in a traditional life cycle. So now let's take a look at the same scenario in a DevOps world and how this would look different with automated software delivery. So we've got the same backlog of changes, and we need to get these released. And we've got the same constraints as before. We've got our fixed maintenance window, and we've got our fixed change approval boards. And these are often immovable quality procedures regardless of the software delivery method being used. The difference though in the DevOps world is that we have a continuous integration testing setup, so that as the changes are being developed, they are immediately being regression tested so that we can see if they introduce any adverse effects on any other parts of the system. And the key here is that this means we don't need a separate test event at the end of the development work. In addition, because UAT can be automated or semi-automated with DevOps tools, the time required for a UAT test event can be significantly reduced without lowering the quality. It becomes obvious that the amount of time that's now available to do development work has been significantly increased. And this means we can deliver more changes to the users. As soon as one piece of work is completed, because we know it's been tested as it's been continuously tested and hasn't broken any other part of the system, the developer can move on to the next and the next one and so on. Importantly, the developer can work right up to the milestone before migrating to the user acceptance testing environment, because everything is being tested immediately and against the production configuration. And it's obvious now that the volume of work done in each month release window is significantly higher, and also we can be assured of its quality. We have complete confidence the release can be moved into pre-production for UAT. We're using a combination of automated and semi-automated user acceptance testing. We have more than enough time to execute the tests and produce the results before the cab board. There's no last-minute panics or testing into the early hours of the morning, or testing during cab as there was in the previous example. So cab approval, that becomes really easy in the DevOps world because the system automatically produces all of the necessary documents that are required to be presented at a cab board. To enable DevOps velocity, you must have these supporting documents produced automatically from the system. Otherwise, the whole principle fails. It's no good developing and testing code quickly if it still takes a week or two to produce a user guide. You need automated requirements documents, design documents, acceptance criteria, test results, updated user guides, standard operating procedures, and so on. And all of this needs to be linked back to the triggering change request. This is true DevOps. So with cab approval in place, the release is put into production during the maintenance window, and this time when Monday morning comes, the users can refer to the updated user guides and the system works fault-free. Remember our angry stakeholder from the slide before? Well, he's now happy to report that users love all the new features they've been given. They've got the updated user documentation so they know how to use it, and the team get a big pat on the back from the stakeholder. So finally, let's just have a look at what happens in an even less constrained organization where there are not the constraints of monthly maintenance windows or cabs as in the previous scenario. It's worth considering if the quality of testing and the consistency of quality of releases was very high, perhaps the need for these risk-reducing cabs and maintenance windows would maybe not be required. Perhaps one to ponder on. We still have 1 month's worth of time to develop changes, and we still have the continuous integration testing setup in place. But we're unconstrained by cabs and maintenance windows. So we bring in the same 3 CRs and start working on them. But the difference being that as soon as one is completed, it can be put into production almost immediately and continuously. So the users are getting the value from those changes immediately. As soon as one request is finished, another can be started and released into production. Some developments obviously take longer to develop than others, but this parallel development is fine because the continuous integration is testing against the current live configuration so that we can have complete confidence that it will work when it's put into production. Again, you can see here, like in the previous slide, that the volume of work that we can get through is increased significantly as we're developing and releasing consistently. So our stakeholder guy this time, well, he's absolutely delighted. Costs are down, so the board is happy. Customers are delighted because they're getting so many more features and getting value from the system. And the team have felt to be doing an amazing job, so get a big pat on the back. So how are so many releases possible so quickly? So like we showed in the previous slide with the cab documentation, this is made possible through automated documentation. So you get, for every mini release, you get a full suite of documentation automatically produced from the system. Now, this typically wouldn't have been possible without this level of automation. So we've seen how great the DevOps world can be, but let's return to the main title of this webinar, which is how to make this a reality in ServiceNow. The problem with the current SDLC is the highly manual nature of nearly all of the process steps during the process. So let's start right at the beginning, and I'll talk you through this a step at a time. So we generally sit down with the users and start to gather requirements in the form of worded user stories. You know the kind of thing. As an ITIL user, I need to raise a help desk incident, etc., etc. And this is done in electronic form, of course. Yep, something like Word, which is digital. But what happens when the design team then need to take these requirements and create a design document? What do? Well, the chances are they probably open up another Word document and start rewording the same kind of thing in a slightly different way. And then the test team get involved and start to write test scenarios in a very similar form again. They, of course, open up Excel, start writing something which looks very similar in content again to the user story with a step-by-step process. Then we need a set of desk instructions for the users and a user guide with screenshots to explain how to use the system. Again, we open up a Word document and start writing the same kind of content as was in the user story, and we include screenshots and start highlighting things and so on. Again, the content is very similar to the user story which we started with way back at the beginning of the process. Very repetitive, very error prone, very resource hungry, tedious and costly. It's all very manual. And in order to make DevOps a true reality, we have to make all aspects of this process fully automated, and that includes, really importantly, the documentation. Otherwise, DevOps fails. So we know we need to automate, but how and with which tools? And what tools should be used for which phase of the life cycle? Well, I'm pleased to say that during my research for this webinar, I found something that might be able to help you. And here it is. So this periodic table of DevOps tools attempts to sum up and shows just how bewildering and complex this task is, and perhaps explains why many organizations have failed to implement DevOps successfully. It demonstrates the absolute plethora of tools that make up this DevOps space. Immediately it becomes clear, looking at this, that there's so much choice that in order to turn the DevOps stream into reality, you either need to be some sort of PhD in DevOps or spend the next couple of years evaluating and selecting possible tools. Feels a bit like trying to piece together a jigsaw from several jigsaws all mixed into one box and hoping they will fit together to make some sort of coherent, beautiful landscape picture at the end. And it's interesting that Forrester drew this same conclusion in a report published earlier this year that said today's application delivery tool chain is complex and fragmented, and going on to say that this means that organizations have to patch together a complex tool chain to automate their delivery pipelines. In this quote, Forrester does note that the situation is getting better, and we feel it is for ServiceNow. So visionary toolset providers have identified this complexity and are trying to assist with this by producing a one-stop shop solution which removes the need to complete the impossible toolset jigsaw that we mentioned before. And most important of all is that any chosen solution needs to recognize the importance of automated documentation in the automation of the end-to-end process. This is absolutely no benefit in being able to automatically test the development in a matter of hours if user guides or training documentation or design documentation takes weeks to produce. You're not going to be able to release functionality. Users won't accept new functionality without instructions for how to use it. ISO auditors won't pass an audit unless the working procedures are updated, and so on. In order to make DevOps a reality, every stage and every aspect of the SDLC has to be automated and flow seamlessly from one stage to the next. Then and only then are you able to make DevOps a reality in ServiceNow. So we've covered quite a lot in a short period of time, but I hope you have found this webinar useful in understanding how to make the DevOps stream a reality in ServiceNow. We've seen how DevOps increases the value you can get from ServiceNow, and we've also seen how difficult it is to make this happen with the plethora of tool choices available, and how difficult it is to piece them together. However, it is possible to achieve this dream with the right choice of solution that is designed specifically for ServiceNow and that addresses these core challenges with implementing DevOps. At autotestpro, we always challenge the impossible. We like nothing more than people to say to us, you can't do that, or it's impossible. We always have this quote in mind, and it seems an appropriate way to conclude this part of the webinar from a quote from George Bernard Shaw. Some men see things as they are and say why, I dream things that never were and ask why not. Okay, so that concludes the presentation part of the webinar, and of course more than happy to take questions at this point. If we don't get around to answering all the questions in the time slot we've got available, obviously we will pick them up after with you. I'd like to just quickly refer you to our website, which is www.autotestpro.co.uk, where of course you can gain further information on our solution, and also of course we're more than happy to take any queries by email following the webinar at sales@autotestpro.co.uk. But I'll now see if there's any questions that have been asked, and I'll attempt to answer those. Okay, are there any questions from anybody? Not got any at the moment, so I'm just waiting for anybody to ask any questions. Okay, so there's a question come from John, who has asked how does Istanbul ITF fit with DevOps? So this is so related to the automated test framework. I'm assuming in Istanbul ITF must be a typo for ATF. So the automated test framework within Istanbul provides some automated testing capability. It's generated quite a bit of interest in the ServiceNow community with the capability to define automated testing scenarios and run those against the system. So I think it potentially has a place to a role to play within the tool set, but it is very much focused around functional testing. So it does not have any capability to do continuous integration testing. It couldn't be used in that way. Certainly not for user acceptance testing, in that it doesn't follow true business scenarios from end to end through the system, so it could be used in that way. And I think one of the interesting things with the ATF is that the module hasn't been integrated with the SDLC or with the manual testing modules, so it's very hard to keep control of all of the different aspects of what's going on in the software delivery lifecycle if it's spread across 3 different modules. And of course, we've talked a lot in this webinar about the importance of automated documentation in the process, and it doesn't cover anything in that respect, so it doesn't produce any automated documentation in terms of user guides or operating procedures or design documentation and so on. So that's my view on that. Thank you, John, for your question. Very good one. Are there any other questions? Just looking to see if anybody else has got any questions. Nothing else. So I think what we'll probably do there then is wrap up the webinar at that point. We're just coming up to our allotted time slot. So I'll say thank you very much for attending. I hope you found it useful. We'll be publishing the webinar on the on YouTube as well, so you can refer to that. And we'll obviously follow up. If you have any follow-up questions at all, please feel free to contact us, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible with those. But thank you for attending, and thank you for your time.